This month at TulsaJS, we'll be learning a little bit about testing in JavaScript. So I figure it would be nice to actually introduce and maybe show a little bit of what the talk is going to be about. So in this video, we're going to be associating with creating a small little to-do app object, or class I should say, in JavaScript and how to thoroughly test that. So just for starters, I just have this really simple application that has a package.json that includes jest and UUID v4, so we can have unique IDs for stuff. And then other than that, for dev dependencies, I just have Babel core and a couple other Babel things. Nothing too important. It just allows me to do like object spread and class properties when I need to. So let's go ahead and jump in and build this application. So to start, we have a to-do app file, and we also have a to-do app.test.js file. And you can see if I open this up and I do yarn test, it'll actually run and it'll find that file, but there's no tests in there, so it won't actually like do anything. For instance, it needs to at least contain one test, so that won't work initially. So we can actually start by adding our first test. So let's go to the test app, and what we're going to do with the test is we're going to basically import to-do app, which of course doesn't exist right now. And then from there on, we're going to have a describe block. Describe block. And that describe block is just going to be the full app, so to-do app. And then we're going to have a little bit of a setup phase. So we'll just do this let to do here so we can actually mutate this variable. So we can have a before each. And on the before each, we are just going to pass an arrow function in. And this is actually going to run, so the before each actually runs before each of these tests that run. So we're just going to initialize our to-do app on the before each, just so it's initialized. And just to make sure that we can clean up after that, let's go ahead and make that to-do going to be equal to null, so it just clears out that environment that we have. So let's get down to writing our first our first spec. So what we want to do is basically have like maybe some predefined to-dos in there. So let's just say it should have predefined to-dos. Predefined to-dos. And then we're just going to expect that to-do.state.todos has a length of 2. So you might be asking, where is this expect coming from? Initially, if you're using something like jest, you'll have an expect option. I'm going to actually show you like the very simple way of creating your own expect. So if we have a variable up here called expect, and we're just going to have that be a function call, and it's going to take a first variable and a second variable, second car. And then from that, we're going to basically say if the first variable is equal to, like, then let's just go ahead and return true. That means that everything's going to run. We're not going to throw any exceptions or anything like that. Otherwise, we're just going to throw a new error and say that the spec failed. So that's pretty much exactly what you need to do to test to see if something runs. So we can see that expect to-do list has a state, that state has to-dos, and the length is 2. So let's go ahead and try to run that test again. We can do -- watch to keep it watching the file. And you can see that it's probably going to fail in this case. Yeah. So for instance, let's see, to-do.state doesn't exist. So there is no to-do.state. There's actually no new to-do app, so there is no new app. So let's go ahead and start and see if we can get some of these tests passing real quick. So if we go to the to-do app file, we currently have nothing in there. So let's go ahead and export default class to-do app. And what this is going to do is it's going to just export that class. And as you can see, once we did that, we got rid of one of those failed issues above, which there was no to-do app. So now we have that working. So the next thing that we need to do is actually put some sort of state on here. So let's go ahead and add state. And on that state, let's go ahead and have some to-dos. And that to-dos is just going to be an array of 2 objects. And those 2 objects are both going to have an ID, and it's going to have a name. So the first one, we can just say milk. And the second one, let's go ahead and say, I don't know, eggs. So name is equal to eggs. So that gets us halfway there, except for you notice that I left out the IDs. One thing that you want to make sure of is, especially when you're adding and subtracting, you know, like if we're removing a to-do and adding a to-do, we don't want to use just the index of it because it'll look really weird. So what we can do is just import a library called UUID v4, and it's just going to come from UID v4. And then so once we save there, we should be able to, and it looks like there's some token errors, of course, because I don't have this here. So if we say, we're going to say this is going to be a UUID v4, and the same thing with this one. So it just initializes a random UUID for this. So as you can see, after saving that, this first test was able to pass. If you're wondering how I've got like UUID installed in the package.json, there was already UUID v4 installed, as well as if you're wondering how I'm able to add class properties like this, that's where this Babel plugin class properties comes from. So, all right, so next step is let's go ahead and write a spec for adding a to-do. So to do that, let's just basically say that, you know, it should add a to-do. Very simple. And so what do we want to do when we add a to-do? I would think we'd just probably call a method on this to-do as .add to-do, right? So we'd say to-do.add to-do, and then whatever the name of the to-do is. So for this case, let's say bacon. So we have bacon that we're adding. And then what we're going to do is we're going to expect that the to-do.state.todos has a length of 3. So that means that we actually added or pushed some sort of thing to that to-do. And as you can see right there, our first test that is failing, part of the test that's failing, is the add to-do because there's no add to-do method. So let's go ahead and add that add to-do method. So if we come down here and say add to-do, that was weird, add to-do, and we'll just that's gonna take a name. So we'll say name here, and then we'll say this dot set state. And I'm taking a little bit of this verbiage from React, but it has nothing to do with React. I just like the word set state and actually how it works. So we're gonna have set state, and that's gonna have some to-dos, and then we're just going to basically take the original state of the to-dos, spread that over it, and then append on one with the ID, a random ID again, and then that name that we passed in, which you can actually shorthand syntax, and we can just say name there. So that works, except for now we're going to get another issue where set state's not defined. So let's go ahead and define that real quick. So we have set state, and we're just going to have state. That's the initial thing that gets passed in. And optionally, if we want, we can have a callback that happens after state is set, so we know exactly what's going on at that point. So we could say this dot state is equal to, and then we're just going to spread out this dot state, and we're going to spread out that new state that we passed in. And then once that's done, let's just go ahead and call that callback just in case somebody wants to have more information about that. And as you can see, once we added that, it's passed. We now are able to add a to-do, so that's pretty awesome. So let's talk about removing to-do. What exactly would we do to remove a to-do? Well, much like adding a to-do, we want like a remove to-do method, right? So we can say it should remove a to-do. And so from here, we just want to say to-do.remove to-do. And then we're just going to pass in the ID that we want to remove. So, because you could have two to-dos with the same name, so you want something unique. So this to-do.state.todos. And since we already know that we have 2 in there already, we're just going to get the first ID of that first one. And so we can just, you know, expect that the to-do.state.todos.length is going to have a length of 1. Why? Because we're removing one, right? So let's go ahead and save that. And as you can see, there is no remove to-dos. So let's go ahead and add that. If we come back here, we can say that we want to remove to-do. And this is going to take the ID in, right? And so this is going to have this dot set state again. What the set state's going to do is just going to set the state on to-dos. And what we can do here is we can say this dot state dot to-dos dot filter. And what are we going to filter off of? We're going to filter off of that ID, right? That ID that gets passed in. So to-do.id is not equal to that ID. So if we save, we should get a passing test. So there we go. We have a very simple to-do app. You could use this in your command line if you wanted to. You could load up the object and play around with it in a REPL environment. But this simple to-do app will allow you to add a to-do and remove a to-do. and it's thoroughly tested. It's got everything tested on this side. So yeah, it's just a little bit of what we'll be learning at TulsaJS this week, and hope to see you there. Thanks.